All right, and we're just starting the meeting here. Gonna admit everybody online. Might just take a minute.
And thank you, Johnny. And just as a reminder to everyone, this is Dominic from the Department of Health. And we'd like to invite you to the Propagation Committee meeting. We are doing a hybrid meeting today. So we have about 20 people in the room with us. And then I'm actually not looking at the meeting, but we have probably about 15 or so online so far. And so just as a reminder to everyone, we do have most of the visuals off because of bandwidth issues so that we can ensure that people who are in areas of the state and don't have as good bandwidth as some of the other areas are not dropping off and having to log back in as much as possible. And then the other thing to remind everyone is we are recording this meeting. And so please remember to keep your language appropriate. And that is actually the other reason why we have the video off. So we do not have to edit the video more than necessary to post it online. With that, I will turn it on over to Chris Peskuski, the chair. And Chris, here you go.
Thank you, Dominic. So, as many of you know, I like to start these meetings off with 30 seconds of silence, just a little ritual to bring a little compassion to a world full of chaos and to remind ourselves why we're in this work. So bear with me. Thank you, everyone. Okay. All right. Thank you, everyone. Next, we'll go into introductions. I'm going to start with introductions online today, since we did them in person last time. Remember, if we end up voting on something, you must have introduced yourself to have a voting share. So please just tell us who you are, if you're from New Mexico, and any affiliations you have.
All right, looks like we've got one hand up in the chat. John Eslick, I have enabled your mic. You can talk when ready.
Hi, my name is John Eslick. I'm a local home mycologist. I've done work with Four Corners fungi and New Mexico fungi. I'm just here to help any way that I can.
Awesome, thank you, John. And next we have James Brown. James, I have enabled your mic. You can talk when ready.
Afternoon, Chris, and thank you again for chairing this committee. Everybody else, hope you're having a great afternoon in New Mexico. My name is James Brown. I'm a doctor of pharmacy here in New Mexico. I'm out of Albuquerque. I'm psilocybin trained, as well as representing 5 Degrees North Healing Foundation. It's a nonprofit, and we're hoping to just provide whatever you guys knowledge, information, sharing. It's just important that we all come together in this space. Remember, that this is for the individual and that we're all here together. Thank you, Chris.
Thanks, James. Next we have James Ferreira. James, whoops, let's see. I have enabled your mic. You can talk when ready.
Hey everybody, James Ferreira with Ignite Synergy, and I'm a resident of Tijeras, New Mexico.
Awesome, thanks, James. And then we have Hannah Rose. Hannah, I have enabled your mic. You can talk when ready. And just as a reminder, the mic icon in Teams is up at the top right-hand side. You'll just want to click on that. There you go.
Thank you. Hello, nice to see everyone. My name is Hannah Rose. I am here in Silver City, New Mexico. I'm a BSW student in the social work program at Western New Mexico, and a first generation curandera and trained in psilocybin administration and facilitation, and just really glad to be here today with all of you.
And thank you, Hannah. All right, and I think that's the last hand up that I saw. Let me just double check the chat here. Let's see. Okay, Catherine Sanchez, Bureau Chief, New Mexico Workers' Compensation, Medical Cost Containment. Good to have you, Catherine. All right, and then we're going to introduce folks around the room.
Todd Starr, New Mexico citizen.
I own Santa Fe Mountain Mushrooms here in Santa Fe. Longtime resident and excited to be here. Hi, everyone. My name is Denali Wilson. I'm the State Director of Strategic Support for the Healing Advocacy Fund, which is a nonprofit that supports state-regulated access programs for psilocybin like ours here in New Mexico. I'm normally based in Las Cruces, so happy to be here in Santa Fe.
Hello, my name is Zachary Lujan. I'm owner of Meadow City Mushrooms in Vegas, New Mexico. I'm a generational New Mexican. And more than 10 generations.
Hello, my name is Eric Baca, and I'm a New Mexico resident.
Hey, James Blackford here with my wife, Kat, out of Clovis, New Mexico. Super excited about everything everybody's doing. And yeah, so awesome.
I'm Gregory Evans. I'm an independent researcher and home mycologist. No affiliations, Santa Fe resident.
Flies on the wall.
Speed on the department.
Hired as the Senior Compliance Officer for the Medical Psilocybin program. I'm from Albuquerque.
Cyrus Rotman. I'm the Associate Environmental Scientist for the, and I'm also in Albuquerque.
My name is Ismail Zutzat. I'm one of the health educators for the Center for Medical Cannabis and Psilocybin. So as you can tell from the accent, I'm actually originally from the UK, but now based in Santa Fe.
Abigail Jerry, IT Project Manager.
And I'm Robert Trucker, the medical director.
And good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dominic Zerlo. I'm the Center Director for Medical Cannabis and Psilocybin.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Jorge Gonzalez, Medical Psilocybin Program Manager.
I'm Sky Rivers. I'm with the Santa Fe Report.
And then we got one more online, Eric Barlow, lives in Las Cruces and no affiliations. Oh, and I'm Johnny Miche with the department.
Thank you, Johnny. Okay, so next we're gonna go over the next set of draft rules that Department of Health has set up. I believe we're displaying them now, so it's the disciplinary actions and appeals process. I'm gonna turn it over to Dominic since he seemingly likes to read these.
Cool. Just to check for everybody online, can you see the draft on your screen? If so, just you can just thumbs up. Okay, cool. I'm seeing thumbs up. We're good.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Before I actually start going into the draft to sort of review this section or sections, I just wanted to go over a little bit of what's going to be happening as far as next steps. So we have an internal deadline that we are hoping to be able to publish the full set of rules for public review and public comment by March 24th, which is just next week. So we've been working on it quite a bit. And between the parts that we did last week in the meeting and this week, it's about 30% of the rules that we've actually been going through in here. Once we actually publish it in the notice in the New Mexico Register and in the Albuquerque Journal, it will be posted on our website, and that link will be there. We'll do an announcement on the main psilocybin page linking to it, so that people can read through the entire draft for these rules. Then there's 30 days where it's open for public comment. So please go and read it, look and see, find what typos we made, see what other potential issues, concerns that there may be, and provide it back to us. So for example, last week, we had a couple of questions on clarification. For example, in part of it, there was a request to clarify what type of registration someone needed to have for the Secretary of State or Tax and Revenue. So we clarified that language a little bit, things like that came out in last week's meeting, and some questions, concerns that we also have taken to address. So please don't hesitate to do that. And then at that point, so long as we make our internal deadline, which I'm positive we will, then the rule hearing itself will be scheduled for April 24th. Now that is with the caveat, if we don't make our internal deadline, those dates will be pushed back and we'll of course announce those. But I'm pretty confident that we're going to make them. But in any case, I just wanted to make sure that we had that aspect that people understood. Now, the rule hearing itself will be a hybrid meeting as well. It will be at the Runnels Building, which is at 1190 South St. Francis here in Santa Fe. And so if anyone wants to come in person, please do. We will also have the online virtual version that will be happening simultaneously. So if people have comments that they want to make, they can do that. The other aspect is you can also submit written comments. Now that will actually go directly to our legal department. And so there'll be a specific address that needs to go to. We will have that as well. That'll be a part of the announcement of the rule hearing itself. So just make sure to go to that, look to see on that. That is the one thing, because that's a part of the legal process, that doesn't go to the medical.psilocybin email address that many of you are used to. So just be aware of that. And at this point, are there any questions with regard to the process? John? Don't be sorry. I want questions. Questions are good.
I was curious, you said in the last meeting and this meeting together, that will amount for approximately 30% of the rules. So that the 70% of the rules that will be, those will just come out when you publish. So
and be open for comment.
Okay, cool. I just want to make sure that so 30% between these two, the other 70% will read them all.
Right. Okay. Right. And again, part of the reason for doing that is, quite frankly, after the recommendations were made, we could have just gone ahead with doing the rule hearing itself, but we wanted to provide some examples of what they would look like so that people could have an idea to look at them and have a little bit of a preview. So the section I'm going through has that caveat, just like last week, that if we get suggestions here today that it's like, oh, we need to clarify that. It may look a little different when you see the published online version, because that's why we're here. We want to get feedback. We want to understand and know. And so that's a part of the idea. Normally in the rulemaking process, it's not actually shown to the public until that actual publication date, and then everybody has it. So we wanted to make sure we had a significant amount. And so that's why we kind of said, let's do these couple of sections to kind of give an idea of difference. I hope that helps. Okay. The other thing, just as I mentioned, especially for those who are in the room, if you have questions and you take the mic, please just remind everybody, because especially online, they don't necessarily know who's speaking. Just remember to say your name again, just so that they know. And I have to remember that myself. So that's a reminder to myself as much as anyone else. But any other questions, either in the room or online?
I just want to take a second to echo what Dominic said. Please bring your voice into the space. We need everybody to make this a good program. So I encourage you all to be your most courageous selves and step up if you think something needs to be said in this meeting.
Okay, I don't see anything online, so we'll go on ahead. So this is the disciplinary actions and appeal process section. And so just to give everybody a little bit of an idea of this is if, for example, during an inspection visit or a compliance visit, we were to go into a production facility and there was some sort of an issue. And so we've done a notice of non-compliance. The entity will have had the time to correct it. So for example, say if it was something like there were cleaning solutions that were left out, we'd give them written notice and they would have 30 days, calendar days to correct that potential issue. And so this is if it is not corrected or if there is a severe issue that would be problematic for potential health and safety, this is then those next steps. So just so everybody knows, there is a section that does talk about that monitoring and if a corrective action is needed. And we didn't include that in because that's really just if you have an action or if there is an issue, you're given 30 days to correct it. And then if it's not corrected, here's kind of the next steps. And we wanted to show this especially because, we're here to try to assist and help, not to try to punish. And so we wanted to make sure everybody understood there's an entire due process before other items are going to happen. And of course, this is with the immediate potential or that there is the immediate potential if there was something that really would be deemed potentially problematic for health and safety of patients or staff or anything like that. For example, big giant holes in the floor that people can trip and fall into, like that sort of a thing. But even there, we would have the option and ability to correct that within the 30 days. That makes sense. Okay. So, and I'm going to read through and we'll do section by section, but please, if anybody has questions as I go through, online, put your hand on up, or in the room, put your hand on up, and that's not a problem. We will interrupt. Don't worry about, well, he keeps on talking. That's okay. Make me shut up. That's perfectly fine. So, disciplinary actions and appeal process. A, immediate suspension record review process. If immediate action is necessary to protect the health and safety of the public, the program administrator or their designee may immediately suspend the permit of a producer or laboratory in whole or in part. 1. A permittee whose permit has been immediately suspended in whole or in part may request a record review in accordance with this part. 2. The sole issue at a record review on a summary suspension is whether the permit shall remain suspended pending a final adjudicatory hearing and subsequent decision by the secretary. 3. A permittee given notice of summary suspension may submit a written request for a record review. To be effective, the written request shall A, be made no later than 30 calendar days from the date of the notice issued by the department and as determined by the postmark. B, be properly addressed to the medical psilocybin program. C, state the requester's name, address, and telephone number. D, provide a brief narrative rebutting the circumstances of the suspension or withdrawal. And E, include attachments of any additional documentation that the permittee wishes to be considered in the record review. Pause there. Any questions so far? Denali?
This is Denali from the Healing Advocacy Fund. I just want to make the recommendation that you consider increasing the time for response to 60 days, especially for parties that are pro se that might not have legal counsel. 30 days is just not a lot of time to assemble the enumerated things, especially if somebody is not operating with legal counsel. And then, the opportunity to find an attorney if they want to. I just would recommend a little bit more time.
Thank you, Denali. Other questions or comments?
And just as a reminder online, if you would like to comment, you can raise your hand with the raise icon that's up at the top left part of the bar in Teams.
Okay. Four, the record review requested subsequent to an immediate suspension shall be conducted by the program administrator or their designee. The program administrator shall appoint a designee to conduct the record review by reviewing all documents submitted by the permittee and the department that are relevant to the immediate suspension. 6, the record review shall be completed and a written decision issued by the program administrator or their designee no later than 15 calendar days from the date that the medical psilocybin program receives the written request for record review. The decision shall be issued to the permittee via certified U.S. postal mail. And just so that people know, the main reason why things like that are submitted by mail is just because that makes it part of the legal record. That's just the main reason for that, in case people are wondering, well, why don't you just send an email? Emails too often can go to spam or junk folders and things like that. We want to ensure people are receiving those types of notices. Any questions so far? And I'm giving pause just because I want to make sure that people have time to digest it.
Looks like we've got one hand online, James Brown. And I think your mic is enabled, so you should be good to talk already.
Dominic, just a couple questions on this one. Would that be a certified or uncertified response? Second question is, are those only generated through the inspection process? As far as like when you guys, the Department of Health would show up, inspection process, or are those claims also generated through a complaint through the DOH type of thing? Can you explain more?
Sure. Thank you, James. It is certified mail. So just to clarify that part. And it is possible that, for example, if a complaint comes in, that would actually then trigger a site visit. And so this would happen then potentially after that site visit. But it would be, there would be a site visit prior to any sort of an issuance of suspension or anything like that. I'll clarify.
So this says, this is Chris. This says this is an immediate suspension. So this wouldn't be part of that. Like we found something bad with an inspection that we can take time to remediate. This seems to me that this is like egregious, and perhaps the most egregious thing I can think of is somebody adding adulterants to product. This would be an immediate suspension, and I'm assuming there would be a recall of product.
Yeah, great question, Chris. And this is Dominic again. Yeah, that's why the other portion, as far as for 30 days, would be if there's minor issues that aren't an immediate concern to the public health and safety of patients and staff. This is really if it's an immediate issue and as you said, an egregious issue. That's when this whole process would actually come into play. Yep. Other questions? Denali.
This is Denali Wilson again. Okay, I just want to make sure I'm understanding. So section A is one type of department action, separate from the rest, or these are steps. Section A is immediate suspension, which is one class of action.
So this is the set of steps. So if there was an immediate suspension due to an egregious public health or safety risk, then these are all the steps that would happen. And so essentially, the permittee would be suspended. We give them notice. They then can turn around and request the record review. So that's essentially their appeal process to say we should not be suspended. And then it's through that review that the process occurs. And if the review occurs and it says, nope, the suspension needs to continue, then that's what happens in bullet 4. And then that's that process.
Okay, so the reason that I'm asking is in point 6. So there's an opportunity for the program administrator. Well, the program administrator will review the review, which we're calling an appeal, and issue a decision. I'm wondering if they're right. So if I think this is premised on the assumption that there wouldn't be contradictory evidence submitted, because if there was, the department would want to preserve a way to amend the suspension or repeal the suspension. Does that make sense?
Right. So say, and this is Dominic. So say, for example, they had received their notice saying you have to correct these actions within 30 days, but due to public health issues, we are doing a suspension until they're corrected. That's where they have that time to submit that document showing, or documentation showing the issue has been completed, has been fixed, has been resolved. And that would be where, when the record review occurs, it's a decision of whether or not the suspension would continue or be lifted.
Okay,
that
and
make
that's
sense?
yeah,
And
and
that's
that's
the
what would
decision.
be
Yeah.
That's what would be delivered within 15 calendar days. Is either we move on to step B or we remove we're rescinding the suspension.
Correct.
Okay, got it.
Does that help?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Any questions online?
We've got one in the chat from James Brown. Is there a separate form used for inspections and their findings?
So good question, James. Yes, there will be a separate form that will be done for inspections. That will actually then outline what all the details and what's expected during an inspection is done. But that's not a part of the rule itself. The requirements of what a producer will have to do is a part of the rule, but the form in and of itself isn't necessarily a part of the rule. But we will have that available prior to any inspections occur, so that people know and understand what those will look like. And we do have in one of the other sections that we're not showing at the moment, it does actually say that based on a form provided by the department. So that way people know in advance.
Guy Rivers with the recorder. So if somebody gets a violation, is there a 2-strike, 3-strike on record where after a certain amount they are, from the program dismissed?
Not at this time. It's really about corrective action. And so the 30 days to be able to correct that. And then if their issues do continue, there could be potential suspension. But it's not a specified 1-strike, 2-strike, 3-strike. Anything else? Other question? Okay, we will move forward. So B, notice of disciplinary action, grounds for disciplinary action. The department may issue notice of an immediate suspension and notice of contemplated disciplinary action to a permittee. Notice shall be served upon a permittee's contact person of record. Notice shall be served via certified U.S. postal mail. A notice shall be deemed to have been served on the date borne by the return receipt showing delivery or the last attempted delivery of the notice or decision to the addressee or refusal of the addressee to accept delivery of the notice or decision. C, grounds for disciplinary action. Oh. Nope, that's fine.
Sorry, this is Denali. So it's settled in. I think I understand why I was confused on section A, and I'm gonna make a recommendation. So on 3D, which is this part of the review record, what the permittee can submit in response. It says right now, providing a brief statement rebutting the circumstances of the suspension or withdrawal. I'm going to recommend we add or demonstrating the remediation of the grounds for suspension. So it's clear that that is something that the permittee can do to rebut, because it may be that they want to concede to, yes, there was something health-wise and we've addressed it. Right? Am I understanding that right in some of your question responses, that that's grounds for unsuspending, right?
Yes, that's actually a part of E. the include additional attachments, but we can add that in as far as clarifying.
Yeah, I would recommend adding it just because I think it's likely that a lot of people, at least in this first stage of department action, are going to be not engaging pro se without the support of a lawyer. It's just helpful to lay out to people what they can list, and it doesn't seem clear here that, right? Yeah, I mean, the circumstance, it may be that there is rebuttable evidence of whatever the department found, but we want to invite people to fix the problem too.
Thank you. We'll pass that on. Any other questions? Okay. C, grounds for disciplinary action. Disciplinary action may be taken against a permittee or permit applicant. Disciplinary action may consist of revocation or suspension in whole or in part, permit, denial of an application for a permit, and other actions. Disciplinary action may be imposed based on A, violation of any provision of this rule, B, selling or distributing psilocybin or a psilocybin product in a manner that is inconsistent with rule or statute, C, threatening or harming a patient, practitioner, clinician, guide, or an employee of the department, D, intentionally destroying, damaging, altering, removing, or concealing evidence of a violation of rule or statute, attempting to do so, or asking or encouraging another person to do so. E, conduct that shows willful or reckless disregard for health and safety. F, failure to comply with the department's requested access to premises or materials. G, falsification or misrepresentation of any material or information submitted to the department. H, failure to adhere to any attestation, acknowledgement, verification, or other representation made to the department. I, failure to submit or disclose information required by this rule or otherwise requested by the department. J, failure to correct any violation of this rule that is cited as a result of a review or audit of financial records or other materials, or that is cited as a result of a monitoring visit or site inspection. K, a discrepancy between a chain of custody form and the transported psilocybin product. L, a finding of non-compliance with tax obligations by a taxation regulatory authority. And M, a finding by the department that any person holds an ownership interest in a permit or permittee that is nominal or without the benefits and risk of genuine ownership. And I'm going to pause there. I know that's a long list of thou shalt not do kind of things, but we want to, again, a lot of them are items that, that we want to ensure that the permittees are doing what they need to do. And I know we have a question here in the room.
James Blackboard here. I assume things like a chain of custody form are going to be standardized and we'll have access to and all that stuff.
Yeah, good question, James. Yes. And that's actually, we had covered that in another section where that chain of custody will be determined by the department. So it'll be standardized. It'll actually be electronic and then printable so that the person who's actually transferring has a copy of it or can access a copy of it if necessary. For example, if they aren't using an electronic device, but it'll also be electronic, so it'll be in the system showing that it's transferring from one end to the other.
Okay, and then as far as that goes, I do have some questions as far as like transferring, from one permit holder to another, end product and that sort of thing. I know there had been a lot of specifics. I didn't know if that was going to eventually gotten into or if that's just going to be in the whole list of all the 100% of the rules.
It's going to be in the whole list of the rules.
Okay, because I assume that there are going to be some rules around that. We can't stop at, a pizza buffet and a, hang glide before we go there to whatever. So, okay, all right, cool.
Yeah, no, exactly. And it's a good question, James. And it's one that, we want to ensure that the product is secure and safe, but also that the people transporting it are safe. So, for example, in the early days of cannabis, for example, and a lot of people don't necessarily realize this, but we did not have dispensaries. In fact, dispensaries were not allowed. And so everything was done through delivery methods. And then there were a few pickup locations where people could order in advance and they could just pick it up from those locations. But again, was going to the patients directly, and patients could go in, purchase, and that sort of thing. With psilocybin, because it's going really to the locations of the permittees, or the providers rather, what really is going to happen is it limits that amount of transportation that's going to be occurring. And so there are those sort of rules, regulations that we'll have in place to help ensure safety. So like you don't want to have on the side of the van big, huge psilocybin mushrooms, like that sort of thing, to make somebody a target, that kind of thing. Thinking about what's your safety plan, because there needs to be one. So what does happen if somebody, for example, stops off at a convenience store to get gas or at a gas station and, something occurs? What are the protocols that follow? And some of that we're not going to necessarily regulate, but we're going to require a plan to that it be present, if that makes sense.
Yes. And so on the same note of something potentially happening, one question I did have as far as transporting, I'm assuming that law enforcement statewide should be aware when this is happening, but you get pulled over. No, really, I'm supposed to have this, right? Like, I assume there's going to be certain things in place showing proof of whatever, something like that.
So one, that's why it's a great question, and I have a ready-made answer for you. The first part is that's why the document for the chain of custody will be able to be printed so the person can have it. But the other thing is, and a lot of people don't realize we have this currently for law enforcement, is that we actually have a 24/7 on-call law enforcement line for cannabis, where if someone is driving down the road and they get stopped by a law enforcement officer, and the officer has questions about what is and is not legal, and if somebody is actually a member of the program and therefore able to carry the amount of cannabis that patients can have versus the amount of cannabis that a non-patient can have, because it's two different things. Non-patients can have up to 2 ounces, and then patients can actually have up to 50. And so if that were to occur, that law enforcement officer calls the line. We have on-call staff who answer that line 24/7, holidays, everything, and are able to answer those questions and verify if someone is in the program. And we've done that actually since the beginning of the cannabis program. And so the line already exists. So that infrastructure, because we're just going to add psilocybin to that, where then the officers will be able to call. And we publish that number. And so that if, say, for example, you're transporting it and a law enforcement officer stops and they're like, yeah, I don't even know anything about the program, you can say, here is a number. We're able to identify, we're able to work with law enforcement to ensure that they know, yes, this is legitimate, and be able to move forward. So yes, we have already thought about those kinds of protections and have them in place. Oh, yeah, I should. Thank you, Rob. Dr. Truckner just asked about bringing up customs. We, of course, cannot do anything with regard to the federal level. It's only really at the state and only in the state. So one of the things is the Border Patrol and the custom stops are outside of our jurisdiction technically. And if you get stopped by a Border Patrol, there's not much we can do on a state level because of their federal jurisdiction. However, we still have had where people have gone through that, like the checkpoint on I-25, gotten stopped. And we're usually able to talk with them about what the program is about, people with regard to, in the past, being either patients or members of the program, and then it's really up to them what they decide to do. Sometimes they simply confiscate items, sometimes they let people go, sometimes they have arrested people. So we don't have any control over that. So that's always a caveat, but we will have that included in some of the educational material. And it's not a new issue, it's one we've dealt with regarding cannabis since the founding of the cannabis program. So, thank you. Denali?
Hi, Denali again. On this issue and Border Patrol, I think it's one of the reasons being in Cruces, that it's really important that we support a diverse grower market, right? That we have folks down south so that can distribute to providers down south. I did have another recommendation back on page 1. And I'm gonna write these up and send them. So I just, reading this again. So if we look at 6, and this is on the same issue of record review, the time, what happens if somebody doesn't request a record review? I think that's what's missing from the rules. I assume there might be some defaults, right? If you don't meet this 30-day, I'm recommending 60 days for a record review. What happens then? So when you read 6, six is premised, the department's action is premised on the record review being requested. I think you maybe need a section that explains what happens if it doesn't, if there's a default or something like that. And again, just going back to my recommendation that we give people as much time as is reasonable. And I think 30 days is just not very many.
Thank you, Denali. And if you don't mind sending it to us as far as the comments, that's great. I am writing them down as well, though. So thank you. Okay, sorry, I got to flip pages. Any other questions so far? Okay. D, persons and entities who may request a hearing. The following persons or entities may request a hearing to contest an action or proposed action of the department in accordance with this rule. A permittee whose permit has been immediately suspended or has received a notice of contemplated action to impose a disciplinary action. And 2, a permit applicant whose application is denied for any reason other than failure to submit a completed application or failure to meet a submittal requirement of this rule. Any questions on that? Okay. Section E, timing and content of request for hearing. A permittee or permit applicant who wishes to request a hearing may do so by mailing a written request for hearing no later than 30 calendar days, and just as a note, 60 days as per Denali's suggestion, 30 calendar days from the date that the notice of contemplated action is received, or in the case of an immediate suspension, no later than 30 days from the date of the immediate suspension. And again, if we have that adjustment to 60 days as Denali has requested. The request shall, 1, be properly addressed to the medical psilocybin program. 2, be mailed to the medical psilocybin program via certified U.S. postal mail, return receipt requested to verify delivery. 3, state the requester's name, address, telephone number, and 4, include a statement of the issue that the requester considers relevant to the review of the action. And I'll pause there for any questions or comments. Okay. Section F, hearing process. 1, all hearings held pursuant to this section shall be conducted by a hearing officer appointed by the secretary. 2, hearings shall be conducted in Santa Fe, New Mexico with the consent of the parties, or with the consent of the parties in another location via telephone or via web video conference. 3, hearings held pursuant to this section that concern patients or patient applicants shall be closed to the public. Hearings may also be closed in whole or in part upon the request of a party to prevent the disclosure of information that is confidential under applicable law. 4, the hearing shall be recorded at a minimum by means of sound reproduction. And I'll pause there, and just as a note, the number 3 is really if, for example, a patient is saying, I should be enrolled in this program. I'm having issues with the provider. They're not supporting me, and I have questions, concerns, and I've been denied ability to be in the program. I'd like this to be reviewed. That's kind of that example. That's why it's patient applicants, and why it's closed to the public to ensure that their privacy and confidentiality is maintained. Any questions? Denali.
Thanks. This is Denali. So that got to an earlier question I had. Are we writing the same appeal process that will be for cultivator permittees, facilitator permittees? You mentioned providers right now. This is all the same process. Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Who would be the other like educational?
Yeah, for example, if we had
Training
educational training program would be able to follow the same process.
Testing?
The labs are included in here
Okay.
because they're part of the permittees and permit
But
applicants.
it will all be the same process for any permit holder. Okay, thank you.
Correct. And so with that in mind, that's part of why the patient part is important in here. So say also, for example, and pardon me, because I was thinking on the patient rule when I was giving the example, but a more applicable example to this would be, say, a patient has gone in, they have received their medication, but they have a complaint because, for example, they believe they were not given the proper dose or the high enough dose, and that the dosage was not as it should be through the testing and the label. Like that would be a complaint, for example. That kind of a process or a hearing, because it involves a patient complaint, would be, or at least the portions revolving around the patient would be considered confidential and HIPAA protected. Does that make sense? I just want to make sure I'm giving a good example for this particular case. So in that case, it involves both the permittee, so for example, a production facility, and it involves the patient. Any other questions? I know it's a little bit dry. I can do voices if people want to. I can't. But.
Gregory Evans. Under the remote hearing options, I think the language could be reworked to protect our rural residents a little bit more, and take the onus off of DOH and maybe just explicitly call out like that any request for a remote hearing would be honored. I think the disparate residency is a major issue.
Thank you, Greg. That's actually a part of that. That's why it says in it that it can be done or with the consent of the parties in the other location or via telehealth. Or I'm sorry, via web video. Yeah. And mind you, everybody, just so everybody also understands, you know, this is written more in that legal regulatory language. There will be, we'll have like guides and FAQs and things like that, which will outline in a little more plain language, because that's the issue is this is not plain language, but our guides and the information that'll go out to people will be ensuring that it's written in as plain language as possible. So that would help cover that, Greg.
Just sorry, follow up on that, Denali. I would agree that I think in the regulation it could be right. So it does say with the consent of the parties. I don't know what the language would be right now, but I agree that for our rural permittees, it would be helpful to have a guarantee that the department is not going to withhold their consent for
Yeah, that's what I was going to say is like, even though I know the department on paper and legalese, it allows for the department to overrule in a way that be equitable.
Okay, I have made comment on that and I'll pass that along. Any other comments, questions? Okay, scheduling. G, scheduling. The department shall schedule and hold the hearing as soon as practical, provided that the hearing shall not be held later than 60 calendar days from the date the department receives the request for hearing. The hearing officer may extend the 60-day time period upon motion for good cause shown, or the parties may extend the 60-day time period by mutual agreement. The department shall issue a notice of hearing, which shall include 1, a statement of the location, date, and time of the hearing. 2, a short and plain statement of the legal authority under which the hearing is to be held. And 3, a short and plain statement of the subject of the hearing. Any questions on this?
This is Denali. I'm going to recommend on this issue of the virtual I'm coming back to that, sorry. But maybe, and I will share this by email, maybe the language we could consider is something, so on that too, after this, say where practicable, the department shall grant a request for a virtual hearing for any permittee whose place of registered business is more than 100 miles from Santa Fe. Something like that.
Questions or comments? Oh, sorry. Any other questions or comments? Okay. I'm going to include the next two together because this one is very short. H, presentation of evidence. All parties shall be given the opportunity to present evidence and argument on all relevant issues. I, record of proceeding. The record of the proceeding shall include the following. 1, all pleadings, motions, and intermediate rulings. 2, evidence and briefs received or considered. 3, a statement of matters officially noticed. 4, offers of proof, objections, and rulings thereon. 5, proposed findings and conclusions. And 6, any findings or decisions recommended by the hearing officer for adoption by the secretary. Any questions or comments? Okay. Part J, recording. A party may request a copy of the recording of the proceeding.
Okay, and I think actually James Brown put his hand up, I think for either something in H or I. Let's go to him real quick. All right, James, your mic should be enabled.
Thank you. Dominic, on this one that we were just talking about, I think it's under I. Would that also include experts in that proceeding? Is that just kind of, we're just already saying that they can be included, or are we saying that does that need to be written at all about any findings from an expert in the field or their other type of thing there? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you on that, James. Yeah, that would be included in this. That would be included as part of the evidence. If it's a written brief, for example, it would be there. If it's done in the hearing, it's of course recorded and a part of the record. So if it was then done verbally, or a combination of verbal and visual, so say, for example, there were items shown on a screen, for example, that would be included in as well. Any other questions or concerns? Okay. Procedures and evidence. 1, a party may be represented by a person licensed to practice law in New Mexico or a non-lawyer representative, or may represent himself or herself. 2, the rules of evidence as applied in the courts do not apply in these proceedings. Any relevant evidence shall be admitted. Irrelevant, immaterial, or unduly repetitious evidence may be excluded. 3, the experience, technical competence, and specialized knowledge of the hearing officer, the department, or the department staff may be used in the evaluation of evidence. 4, an appellate's failure to appear at the hearing at the date and time noticed for the hearing shall constitute a default.
This is Denali, just really quickly. So starting on 4 that you just read and through the rest of the rules, it says appellant instead of permittee. And I'm not sure why, because we haven't really, we're not in an appeals process.
So my understanding on it, Denali, is that at this point they are actually appealing, because they're appealing the notice of contemplated action or the suspension or revocation. And so they are going through an appeal process. And so that's why it is appellant at this part.
So where's the hearing or the decision final? Where does it become final in the process? I think that's the point that somebody, and anything after that would be.
That's at part P.
Yeah, which is why I think that we're not. Right, so someone can appeal an administrative decision, but that decision has to be final. So there's rules that aren't, it doesn't seem are anticipated or set out here, but there's court rules. So it's this form 1074 or 075 if it's a constitutional issue that allows someone to appeal an administrative decision that's final. I guess it's the finality of it that has me questioning whether we're technically in an appeal or not. But that might be beyond the scope of this discussion.
Okay, I'll pass it on to the department's attorneys, but this is actually pretty standard language as far as utilizing that when we're doing the hearing offices, hearings with regard to this sort of complaint or a suspension, notice of contemplated action.
Gregory Evans. On number 4 here, under A, the appellant's failure to appear at the hearing, I think we should include a provision for good cause, medical emergency law.
Sorry, if you could just speak up a little bit into the mic.
Recommending adding a provision for good cause under failure to appear, acts of God and whatnot.
Thank you, Greg. Any other questions, concerns, comments? Okay. Part L, conduct of proceeding. Unless the hearing officer determines that a different procedure is appropriate, the hearing shall be conducted in accordance with the procedures set forth in this rule. The following procedures shall apply. 1. The appellant shall present an opening statement, and the department may present an opening statement or reserves the statement until presentation of the department's case. 2. After the opening statement, if made, the appellant shall present their case. 3. Upon the conclusion of the appellant's case, the department shall present its case. 4. Upon conclusion of the appellee's case, the appellant may present rebuttal evidence. And 5. After presentation of the evidence by the parties may present closing argument. Any questions, comments? Okay. Section M, burden of proof. The appellant shall bear the burden of establishing by a preponderance of the evidence that the decision made or proposed by the department should be reversed or modified. N, continuances. The hearing examiner may grant a continuance for good cause shown. A motion to continue a hearing shall be made at least 10 calendar days before the hearing date. O, telephonic and web video hearings. 1. Any party requesting that a hearing be conducted via telephone or web video conference shall do so no less than 10 days prior to the date of the hearing. Notice of the hearing shall be given to all parties and shall include all necessary telephone numbers or instructions for access to the web video conference.
This is Denali. Maybe this would be a good place if we're amenable to adding the provision that the department shall grant, for equity reasons for our remote permittees. I would just recommend the same language that we considered in F2.
Thank you, Denali. 2, the in-person presence of some parties or witnesses at the hearing shall not prevent the participation of other parties or witnesses by telephone or web video conference with prior approval of the hearing officer. And I'll pause there for any questions or comments up to this point. P, recommendation, action, and final decision. 1, The parties may submit briefs, including proposed findings of fact and conclusions of law for consideration by the hearing officer. 2, no later than 30 calendar days after the last submission by a party, the hearing officer shall prepare and submit to the secretary a written recommendation of action to be taken by the secretary. The recommendation may include proposed findings of fact and conclusions of law for adoption by the secretary, and shall propose sustaining, modifying, or reversing the action of proposed action of the department. 3, the secretary shall issue a final written decision accepting or rejecting the hearing officer's recommendation in whole or in part, no later than 45 calendar days after receipt of the hearing officer's recommendation. The final decision shall identify the final action taken. Service of the secretary's final decision shall be made upon the appellant by certified mail. The final decision or order shall be included in a permittee's file with the medical psilocybin program.
And after Greg or any other comments on this section, James has a comment on the previous section, but we can come back to that.
You want to take care of that first? Okay. I just wanted to call out cannabis's 10-day emergency hearing window and see if we could apply something like that for a small producer being out for 135 days, basically 5 months, is decent.
Let's see, we'll go to James Brown's question. Can you explain and expand on the originations of these types of claims? Will there be examples of what these types of complaints can be?
I'm not 100% sure what you mean, James, but let me attempt, and if I'm wrong, please tell me. So these would be things, for example, if we were to go in a site inspection and where, for example, there were chemicals that were being utilized and being sprayed through misters or something like that. I'm hard pressed to think of something, quite frankly, that really would be egregious, especially with all the people that I've met involved in the area. But but if there was something like that that were happening, even if it were being done accidentally, like for example, bleach being spilled into the water or something like that, accidents happen. What are the safety protocols that are put into place for them? I will say in all of the years, as far as for cannabis, while we did have various complaints and other items, they would generally be resolved fairly quickly and readily. There were situations and issues where, for example, we would go in on a site inspection and discover that, quite frankly, pounds and pounds of cannabis that had mold or mildew on them. And those, of course, needed to be destroyed. And there were arguments of, no, we're not going to destroy it. We're going to remediate it when it wasn't necessarily possible. So those are the kinds of things. I don't necessarily see the same sort of issues with regard to psilocybin mushrooms, but it still needs to be there as a in case, because there could also be situations we never would have thought of. And so we do need to have that there. You know, the anticipation, of course, is that the people involved are all going to be good actors, but you never know when potential bad actors enter into the fray. And so that's what we need to be cautious about. And that's really what this section is about. We want to ensure that people understand we are looking at this from a safety perspective. And again, as I mentioned before, or if there are minor things, small things that are going on that need to be corrected, there is that other action that would happen long before any of this, where the permittee would have 30 days to correct whatever potential issue there was. This is really if there's something that is so egregious that it really is an immediate potential health and safety issue, or again, if it was ongoing and not being corrected. And so that's when this would come into play. Not in the situation where there was some minor infraction or some minor not following the law, forgot to enter something into the system that's going to be required for tracking product. And so as long as that gets corrected and amended within that 30-day period, we move forward. But if, for example, there are other issues, one of the other ones that is outlined in this is, for example, say we had a producer who was then selling through illegal methods or selling illegally, illicitly to other individuals or selling across state lines. Those are things that are not allowed and not permitted. Those could be other reasons for immediate suspension and for this process to then come into play. I hope that helps, James. Did I catch what you're trying to sort of get at, or do you need to clarify? Or do I need to clarify a little more?
I think your mic's enabled, so you should be able to unmute if you need.
Don, that definitely answered it, but one more thing to follow up is, and I'm with you, I think everybody that's going to be dealing with is very professional, but I just want to make sure that the language here is, because these type of claims they're going to be very serious, and people in a rural community are going to be, frankly, Don, I'm a little scared. This is going to be a pretty big process, and it should be, because these claims are very serious to take. I mean, I just want to make sure that those people are also seen as innocent until proven otherwise, even, and so I want to make sure that the origination of these type of sightings, issuings, would only be given on the proven ground that that is actually occurring. And that's all I was just trying to say. Thank you.
Sure. And thank you, James. I do appreciate it. And that's why, as I mentioned, there's that part of the process that happens before, where there's that opportunity to correct issues, and all of that sort of, aspect of it is actually also in place. Because we want to ensure that everybody, people make mistakes. There are accidents happen. This is not about those sort of things. This is about when people are deliberately and egregiously doing things that are potentially going to be harmful or outright illicit within regard to the Medical Psilocybin Act. So completely understand that, though. And we got Denali.
A couple of things. I wanted to second Gregory's recommendation for an emergency hearing, especially because I've recommended an extension for the permittee's benefit of having more time to file a review. That just adds more time to the full timeline. I'm not familiar with that emergency clause in the cannabis regulations, but certainly agree that, hearings are really expensive for the department to conduct. We really want to be incentivizing compliance and remediation around every corner. And so at every point where we can remind people that remediatory evidence should be submitted as a part of this process, I'd like to make that recommendation. And I imagine that that's a part of the emergency hearing provisions as well. And then on the final section, this is really where my earlier comment about the term appellant comes in. So I'm curious, and maybe this is a question for legal. I'm not sure, or maybe it's a question for somebody in the room that has experience with the cannabis board. I'm not sure whether there is a statutory right to appeal. If there is, that is already set out in how to appeal to a district court, right? We're leaving the administrative process and we're appealing to a district court to have judicial review of the process. And I would just say that if there isn't already a statutory right to review, I think there needs to be a provision setting up what the review to district court is. It's just a really incredibly important due process protection that there is some way for, after a final decision, whether it's already protected in statute, I'm not sure, or if not, we set it up in the rules and regulations and make sure that somebody has a way for district court review.
Yeah, and just as a note, that is something that if, for example, if there was a revocation that occurred and the secretary's decision came out, they would still, of course, be available. Those other legal options would be available.
I think I want them to be, and they're only available if there's a statutory right to review or if it's in the rule, and that's the question that I have. I'm not sure if it would be in the Medical Psilocybin Act that we create a right to review for permittees, but if we didn't create it, then we need to create it in rule now, because otherwise it's actually not available unless there's a constitutional violation. And there's just, there's speech and religious access. I can see that maybe coming up, but that's going to be really extreme cases.
Thank you, Denali. I'll pass it on. And just as a note, as far as all of the dates with regard to how long the process takes, one thing to note is that is in all the cases of the date, it's no later than. So if it could be a speedier review if that's occurring. So that's actually where that part comes in as far as with regard to how fast the process takes. But yes, if, for example, everybody who's involved in it takes the longest possible time frame of it, yes, this can take several months for this process. However, if again they take the shorter time frame and make sure that they submit items in a timely fashion and all of that, it can take months. But that then it affects, and this is where Denali's point earlier was a good one of if they need to obtain legal counsel, any of that, it may take longer.
Greg's got his hand up.
But I'm gonna vocalize it.
I'll speak into the mic.
Oh, yeah, sorry about that. If there were any way to add options to opt in for electronic communications, I would love to not have to get mail were I a part of the program. I don't know if that's a possibility. I'm sure you have an answer.
Yeah, so the reason why it's there specifically for the US Postal Service is, again, because that's what we have to do for legal notices, that aspect of it to ensure delivery, and why it's also certified. However, that does not mean, and we're already putting the plans in, that as the system goes into play, that there will be electronic notices as well. But again, we can't just do it through email because there's too much where people can actually say, I never got that. It went to my spam. It went to my junk. It automatically got filtered out, all that sort of thing. So we will have both options, but from a legal standpoint, we have to have that US Postal.
Great. Greg and I are just bouncing off each other. I'm going to recommend maybe, this is Denali. I am going to recommend, so where we have certified mail, maybe say and other reasonable means. That is a way to capture that we are making all attempts to make contact, especially with people who may have PO boxes that are, I don't know, if you're running a business, you go to the post office maybe once a week, and that is cutting into your time to respond. So I'll come up with better language recommendation, but I think we can just add it to the end. Yes, we're issuing to a permittee via certified US mail and other reasonable means of communication.
Do we have other comments or questions? Anything online? Yeah. Okay. Great.
And then Denali will. It's good having a meeting with you, Denali. Thank you for everything you do. I just wanted some clarity on where corrective action protocols are going to be written and defined, and what part of the process that book is going to be, because that's clearly not for this section, but it's integral.
It'll actually be the sections right before this. And that's where it'll outline, these are the things that happen. Here's a notice of contemplated action. These are the things you need to correct. And with that timeline and all of that there and outlined in that aspect, in that section. Okay. Other questions?
James Brown just says, I'm in favor of the addition of electronic submissions as well, if possible.
I actually wanted to, this is Denali again. I wanted to return to something that we discussed last meeting, but I don't know if that's appropriate at this time or if I should wait.
No, go right on ahead.
And I know that I've shared I shared concerns last week with around the requirement for demonstrating either ownership of the premises or having written permission from the landlord. I haven't really figured out the best way to make a recommendation for an amendment there. I just continue to be really concerned that we're going to disproportionately prejudice folks who do not own the place where they're doing business. It seems very unlikely that renters, even landlords who want to be supportive of the industry, will sign that. So I actually am just curious if maybe folks who are already in mycology were in the room, and if you are a renter especially, I think it would be helpful for us to maybe have a conversation either as a part of this meeting, if that is acceptable to the chair and department, or after the meeting concludes, to talk about what your renting situation is now and what your landlords may be willing or not willing to do as it comes to that provision.
We have time for discussion now, so if anybody would like to talk about that, bring attention to that, let's go ahead. I think several of our mycologists have not showed up to this meeting. I'm not seeing a lot of the normal, usual suspect on.
I just want to say that I grow mushrooms and I own my own property, and I'm actually just bought a second property and I'm developing it for a new facility. And that's why I'm here, to make sure that I'm developing it correctly, in case you have any special rules.
Oh, and what's your name again?
Oh, Stephanie Duquette with Santa Fe Mountain Mushrooms.
Thanks.
So I actually own all my property as well, and my ownership to my business is actually being transferred over to me. So if anything happens with my business partner, he's just concerned. He's an elderly gentleman. He's just concerned with his health. So if he ever just randomly kicks the bucket, it's a smooth transition for me. But I've been doing this since the end of 2016, and I've gone from, I was originally doing in a rental home. I didn't speak with my renters when I did it in my rental home. I just kind of did it. I just made sure nothing was leaking anywhere. Really was making sure I wasn't causing any physical damage to the buildings. I wouldn't know how to address that as a renter now, just because I do know that mycology can lead to a lot of damage if you're not doing it properly.
What was your name?
My name is Zachary Clark.
Thanks. Right, and James Brown put in the comments, if the Department of Health is unable to deliver or conduct the inspections, what are the next steps in the process? Is there wording to that already?
Thank you, James. It's a requirement that, from our standpoint, that we're going to have to conduct those inspections. If for some reason, for example, when we had COVID occurred, we figured out ways to do it, including through electronic means, where, for example, when inspections would happen, people that were there had to actually show on their electronic device with video, and they had to actually direct the cameras into all of the areas that were requested. Obviously not ideal, and that was a very interesting situation, to say the least, but there are other potential methods sometimes that can be utilized. But that is a part of what we will be doing as part of the program, is doing those inspections to ensure that agencies or that permittees are within compliance. But it's a great question. What would happen, for example, if our entire staff won the lottery and we suddenly didn't have anyone to do it? That we would have to move forward with that. And there will be down the road some additional regulations that will be implemented or that will be reviewed and brought up that will actually address some of those kinds of potential long shot but emergency type situations.
Oh, and actually real quick before we go to Denali, Hannah Rose has her hand up online. Hannah, your mic should be enabled. if you want to unmute.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to speak to what Denali brought up, because this ties into like equity, an equity issue, like and like accessibility and inclusion. Because if if her projection, is correct, that like a lot of landlords will be hesitant on signing off on this, then that really limits everyone to being landowners, which is a highly privileged position. And so I guess I just wanted to thank Denali for speaking to this, and some ideas that I have are, like like incentives for landlords to sign off on this, or incentives for landowners to support other people that aren't landowners in this process. I'm just coming from that social work perspective of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So those are just my curiosities, and I just wanted to share that. Thank you.
A similar
Oh my
equity
gosh,
question.
I'm so sorry. We were actually muted for a hot second on the line. So nobody, yeah.
After
Oh,
the
that's
online comment, we didn't hear anything. So if someone was speaking, can you please repeat yourself? My apologies.
I can, and I'll do it even better this time. I was just expressing gratitude and recommended that we continue to have this conversation ahead of the April 24th public hearing. Maybe we can come together with a recommendation to the department. And I requested that Hannah, you share your contact information in the chat, and I get it from the department staff here in the room. I think there's a related issue. As people were sharing, it sounds like we have a lot of home-based growers, people who are selling at farmers markets now. I mean, this is the industry that we're talking about incorporating in here. And so the related equity question that I have that I think is very connected to this ownership question is whether we are going to allow residentially zoned places of business, or if we will require them to be commercial, because owning your home is an equity issue, and then separately, right, owning a business property, that's a whole different issue. So I don't know if that question is for the department or if it's for another committee, but that's my question.
So earlier in the process, we made the recommendation that all businesses had to be licensed and zoned appropriately per the municipality. So it's going to be up to your local regulations of where that business.
Still Gregory. I fit into the category of home ecologist. I don't have any visions of providing like producer, like I'm not going to do that. I believe strongly that this program needs to stand up and be effective for a period of time to create normalization in our society. And then hopefully that creates a world that opens up boutique markets doing specialized mycology in a variety of settings possible. That's my personal view on the issue, but I think that we really need to be pretty like hard-lined about what we produce for the medical program. I think a lot of people see a relationship between like medical cannabis, but it's not that. Like there's no strip mall doctor that gives you a script for $100 and then you meet somebody in an alley. That's not what this is. And I think the context needs to be respected and we all need to be patient. And like, we're going to change the world, but we have to do it incrementally.
Thank you, Greg. Any other comments?
Just real quick online from James Brown. Thank you, Chris, the advisory board members, and the department for the in-person and virtual meetings. We all appreciate what you're doing for the program.
And we have a little more time if anybody wants to discuss any other aspects of the program. So I'm not sure if the advisory board is going to have more work for the propagation committee. We don't have any more of these meetings scheduled, so this might be a bittersweet ending to that, the propagation committee. I'm not sure, but if we do have more meetings in the future, I'll be looking forward to working with you all again. But I'll be in the other committees and just grateful for all your support and all of you coming into this space and bringing your voices in to help make this a great program. So thank you.
Awesome. And this is just a reminder for if you want to submit public comment to go ahead and send that to the medical.psilocybin@doh.nm.gov. Yay. I got it right. Yeah. And again, I'll say it again. Well, I'll put it in the chat. That's what I'll do. We don't need to hear that again. That was Johnny Mouche talking, by the way, for the minutes. Oh, yes, she did. All right, if there's no other comments in person.
I have one. Can we give Chris a round of applause?
Yes, let's give Chris Peskuski a round of applause. Thank you, Chris. All right, Chris, are you good to adjourn? All right, we are ending the meeting. Thank you, everybody.